stop using separate names in the bucket object. That is, have a separate bucket name from the name object method name. Instead, the generated name is going to be the name for the bucket on the Kubernetes side, as well as the driver side, or what we send to the driver side.
Sid, don't you need to name the bucket instance?
Yeah.
When the central controller creates a bucket instance, it has to have a name,
Yeah.
and we don't know the name of the bucket yet for Greenfield. We only have a prefix at most, and that's optional. So I don't know how you can create a bucket instance that the sidecar uses as a trigger to call create bucket RPC call when the bucket instance name, it's a catch-22. The bucket instance name is supposed to be the name of the real bucket, but we don't know the name of the real bucket till the driver returns.
So Jeff, based on what we talked about, so we're going to come up with a deterministic name based on the prefix for the bucket instance itself. And it's up to the driver to choose to either honor it or, mangle it or generate a new name from it, or just do its own thing. So the name of the bucket is actually generated by us now, and then sent to the driver. And the way we generate it is using some deterministic algorithm. So for the same bucket request, we get the same name over and over again.
Okay, so you're saying Cozy now generates the bucket name,
yeah,
the physical bucket name,
mm-hmm.
Whereas previously we were saying the driver can do it because the driver, we're empowering a driver to ignore prefix if the driver wants. We're empowering the driver to use names that comply with the underlying storage. But you're saying now Cozy's going to generate the full bucket name.
Yeah, Cozy's going to generate it. The driver still has the freedom. Go ahead.
It's going to generate a string that we're calling bucket name, but the name that actually gets stamped on the actual bucket doesn't have to be that.
Yeah.
So. Right. And so therefore, what is the purpose of the bucket, the Cozy bucket resource instance being a name that tries to track the bucket name when the driver doesn't have to follow our suggestion?
Well, it's for two reasons. One is for item potency, so that like under any kind of failure circumstance, you can reliably retry until you succeed, or clean up. And two, it's also serves as the suggested name down to the lower layer if it wants to respect the user's suggestion. But it doesn't require it to, because that would be kind of restrictive.
Yeah, it becomes a trade-off for the Cozy driver to decide, do they, care about this user experience where you have identifiable user names that the user requested, or is that infeasible, and are they going to optimize for just having randomly generated names that make sense for their storage system? And that decision is left up to the driver, but the system allows for it. Allows for both.
So the purpose of making the bucket instance name sort of match or likely match the actual bucket name is a usability. It's a UX idea that the admin, when they're listing bucket instances, can sort of see a visual connection between the bucket instance name and the underlying bucket's name.
That's one benefit, but the other benefit is it relieves the driver the responsibility of storing any kind of state if it doesn't want to. It can just take the name and pass it directly through and not have to do any processing on it. And the statelessness is a significant benefit for driver implementers. If they want to be stateless, they can, as long as they can take the name and just use it in its raw form or mangle it reliably.
Yeah, I buy that. I think that's a good argument. I'm not sure I understand your item potent argument. It seems like if we did a bucket instance name of foo-UUID, where does that fail in when you were talking about an item potency benefit?
So as long as it's always unique. That's the requirement for idempotency. You're right. You could have a different prefix for the purpose of the name that you could pass in for idempotency, but why not? If we have something that's already guaranteed to be unique, use that as the idempotency key.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Okay. So is the overall conclusion more or less clear to everyone? Any more questions?
Are we going to call the thing that comes back in the response a name or an ID? What are we going to call it?
I mean, that's going to be the real identifier for the bucket.
Yeah, just to reduce the cognitive overhead, I'd say align it with CSI so that people who are familiar with that model can easily pick it up as well.
What is it called in CSI?
A volume ID. So here we would call the thing that comes back the bucket ID.
Ah, I see. And in every call, we use the volume ID.
Yes. Every subsequent call after the create, you always refer to it by ID.
Nice. Okay. All right. Yeah, let's go with the bucket ID. I like that. And the expectation on the driver is for the same prefix, the driver should always, or for the same, input name, the driver should always generate an ID. Should then generate it deterministically.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it has to behave deterministically. Like it could, if it has a data store, it could generate it randomly and store the mapping, and then as long as it remembers the mapping next time, it's good.
Yeah. That would work too. Okay, so this is clear. The next thing is in the same set of objects, the bucket request and bucket class. One of the things we're facing is adding more and more protocol-specific fields into these objects. So it is pretty clear at this point that it's going to be time consuming for any vendor that wants to add new fields to a protocol specific structure. So we were thinking, and I want everyone's input here, even if there's a better way to do this, we want to know, which is it seems like we should be using map string structures, a generic structure for holding protocol specific information rather than a type structure where we have fields for different information in the protocol. What do you all think?
Yeah. I mean, for things that are effectively opaque to Kubernetes or to the CO, string maps work well.
Yeah, and so let's say we call that parameters. Like here, we already have a parameters section in the bucket class, which is outside of the protocol structure. And one of the things we were talking about was, is that parameters still needed because we have a protocol specific parameters here. And we think it might be needed. Again, open to suggestions here, or there's a better way to do this, we want to know, which is that for protocol specific information, it goes into parameters inside the protocol, but for the provider, there can still be some information that don't belong in the protocol, but that's needed. So give an example.
You need to have protocol. If most of the information is under parameters, should just put everything under parameters as one field that has
inside the protocol, you mean?
I mean, instead of just it looks like we don't really need protocol if you have a parameters there. I mean, it's just put everything under parameters then.
So the way we are getting at this is there is a conceptual difference between protocol specific parameters and just parameters. And our question is really, like you're saying, should we have two specific fields, or does it make sense to have them as one field, one string map with all the protocol and provider specific information mashed in.
What's an example of protocol specific information?
Like right here, region, say US East 1, is protocol specific. But then, like if you're running, if you're doing Ceph with the S3 API, you have to choose a storage pool, and say you've chosen the storage pool 1, and that would go into the parameters that's outside of the protocol.
I was just wondering, why can't we just put protocol under parameters? We don't really need protocols, right? So like CSI drivers, you have so many different type of CSI drivers. We don't really have like protocol for each one. We don't have ISI protocol. We don't have a.
So I'm not convinced that these protocol specific things are opaque to Kubernetes. Like if they're S3 specific and every S3 driver needs to, or every driver that purports to support S3 has to support this parameter, then it's not really opaque and it's part of the spec. And we might validate it or we might do things to it.
But it's not. So even if it's S3 specific, I don't believe, other than something like bucket name, there are many fields, any fields really, that have to be supported by all of them. Even region.
How about things like the access key and the secret?
Those things don't go into the bucket creation flow.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking through, like they're things that we want to validate.
Wouldn't the driver validate it even if we do or do not? I'm just asking.
What we're concerned about is portability, right? Like if we want to advertise like this is an S3 compatible bucket type, then the idea is I should be able to go out and invent a new storage product that implements that protocol and expect that everyone who has coded their Kubernetes workload to run on top of these S3 buckets should be compatible with mine, right?
So that's why we wanted
that's the portability.
Yeah, that's a good argument. So that's one of the main reasons we wanted to have two separate parameters field. If you see, there's one inside protocol and one at the bottom, which is at the same level as.
You really need the parameters under. I mean, if you separate them, then you have a parameters under. I mean, at the bottom, right? And then you have protocols. Everything on the protocols will just be first class fields, right? Why do you still have need a parameter there? I just feel.
Because so that's a good question. So the issue is there are a lot of protocol specific fields, a ton of them, and if AWS comes up with new set of parameters, or some other vendor comes up with a new set of parameters for their protocol, in order for them to
if it has to be in product parameters, then is that still compatible for the same protocol? I mean, I'm confused. I mean,
yeah, that's a good point.
So the generalized parameters down at the bottom of the bucket class make sense because those are truly opaque. But I don't believe that the parameters under the protocol are opaque. I think that like things like region, while they might have a little bit fuzzy meaning, like it's not an opaque field. It's a field that we understand what it means, and it should mean something similar across implementations of S3.
Okay, so what I'm concerned about is just like what happened with cloud providers, we could not quickly enough move along with the requirements of the cloud vendor when they had to make a change. So we ended up moving things out of tree where they themselves managed these fields.
But that's an API between like a deployer and a vendor, right? Not there's no end user interaction there, is there? Or am I missing? I'm not familiar with cloud.
Do you have some concrete example to show us why something has to be in the parameters, not first class field on the protocol?
Because what I'm getting at is like this is going to become part of the API for users that are consuming S3 buckets. Like they're going to write their workload to like create the bucket class in a certain way.
But how many fields can we support? There's probably hundreds.
And so let's take a step back and think about why you have first class fields and why you have opaque list of key value pairs. And the reason that we ever do opaque key value pairs is to allow for customization of the resource being created, where Kubernetes does not care about the specifics of what that customization is, because it does not affect Kubernetes at all.
Yeah.
And so if Kubernetes cares about a specific field such that, you know, it needs to be aware because of how that resource is going to be surfaced, how that resource is going to be discovered. Basically, Kubernetes needs to make a decision or do something with that information that is unique about that field, then it must be a first-class field. And so
Yeah.
if you apply that filter, does it still make sense to have opaque parameters inside of the protocols?
Yeah. So are there any fields from the protocol that Kubernetes needs to use here? I
Yeah,
don't.
like so the region is going to show up in the actual like bucket credentials or whatever we call the thing that appears inside your pod when you attach to a bucket. Like the region is one of the things that we have to give back to you so that you can.
Everything from the protocol structure is what we're going to put into the bucket.json. That was what we decided.
Yeah, so like that Kubernetes is processing that information.
But
And
it's just literally just taking the map and putting it in there.
So I think the argument you're making is effectively all of the parameters or all of the protocol block could be opaque.
Yeah. And
I think that makes it
the,
difficult to have portability across different things that purport to be S3. It makes it very easy to write a workload that only works on one particular S3 implementation, and when you try to swap out a different one, it breaks. And that seems like something that we should want to avoid.
Well, we're trying to avoid user error based on what you're saying. So if a user writes the parameters in such a way that it's specific to whatever the provider is, then yeah. But it is also possible to write parameters in such a way that it's portable, given the structure.
Not if everything is an opaque field. Like, I mean, I thought we said that the contents of that file that we end up providing to the pod is effectively an API, and everything in it is an API. Because like, if I want to write, let's say I'm a software developer and I'm writing applications that that do something interesting, and as one of the requirements is they need a bucket to store things on. Like, I have to code my application to read these files and understand what's in them, so I can consume buckets that Kubernetes gives me. And if there's no documentation anywhere that says what is going to be in that file, like, what am I going to do?
No, the documentation comes from the driver. What fields are understood by the driver?
Right, but I think what Ben's getting at is, how do you enforce that contract? Effectively, if you make this a pass-through, then what you're saying is that the driver gets to determine what an S3 protocol looks like. And I think what Ben is arguing is, like, if you have 3 sets of drivers that implement the S3 protocol, they all choose to expose a different set of parameters. As a consumer, how do you work with that? Versus if you have a set of hard-coded parameters that you will receive for S3, then as a consumer, I can always depend on getting X, Y, and Z for an S3 protocol. And it becomes the responsibility of the drivers to figure out how to fill those in.
Yes. And I don't have a problem with like adding some extra stuff, but there has to be a minimum bar that says you're always going to get this stuff for an S3 bucket. So as a software developer, I can look at those things and write my app to consume them and then ignore everything else.
My concern is it is not up to us to decide what those fields are. I
think that's kind of one of the aims for this project, is to achieve that in such a way that as a consumer, you can say, okay, I am going to be agnostic of the specific provider. I only care about the protocol. The protocol is S3, and I know that I will get this set of parameters. And so it allows for that portability at the workload layer.
Yeah, I think that the key here is that for bucket protocols that are not S3, that are basically only implemented by one implementation in the real world, like this is less of a problem because then you're coding to a very specific implementation. But S3 has become a de facto standard, and there are dozens of interoperable implementations, and there are features that are common to all of those, whether or not they're documented. I mean, that's Amazon's fault, I guess, for not sort of making it a standard. But like there's a de facto standard, and there's fields that just have to be there because otherwise it's not S3. And like those are the fields that we should make them top level fields and document what they mean and say everything that purports to be S3 has to fill these in. And then the guy that wants to consume it knows that he'll at least get that. It might get more stuff with extra fancy things, but like they don't have to depend on the fancy things. They can depend on what's documented.
I like that. I like how Saad put it. Yeah. So could we, again, could we achieve that by using well-defined keys for the map?
I think so. I think I have implemented, you know, S3 clients and servers, and like there's basically like 5 things that you always need, and that's, you know, and that you can tease it out of the S3 spec, and like the region is one of them, and the endpoint and the bucket name, and then there's like and then the access key and the secret. I think like it's something like those 5 things are always going to be there. And of course, we don't want to shove secrets in here because we have special handling for those. But like when it comes to defining like what shows up inside the bucket, I think we can be very specific about that. And then for the parts of that information that come from the bucket class, I say it's a first level field because it has to be there. We need to validate that it's not empty or that it's allowed to be empty.
Yeah, I'm saying even in that case, could we do that using well-defined keys for the map itself rather than first keys? Yeah. Again, I'm not for one way or the other. Asking questions here because we could achieve that way. Would that work?
I would lean away from that. I mean, like, yeah, maybe in practice it would work, but it feels like a hack.
Yeah, you don't want it to be strongly typed.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to need a map string thing regardless. I'm thinking from the point of simplifying this structure rather than doing something.
So just so I understand that the reason that the parameters down at the bottom aren't enough is because those aren't going to get sent through to the pods that eventually consume the bucket.
Correct.
Those only get sent to the provisioner. The ones that are in the protocol field will get sent to the pods, and that's why you need them up there. Okay, I understand that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're almost out of time, but if we can quickly kind of wrap up this one conversation, which is for the sake of keeping the struct simple, the protocol struct itself simple, my question is, I understand not relying on the type system could feel a little hacky, but we're not making this decision out of laziness as much as we're thinking about it in terms of what's the best way to keep this structure, what's the best way to enable different vendors to add new fields without having to go through the Kubernetes development lifecycle? So 9-month wait, you know. Go ahead.
So I think that I don't think that's a concern. I think that for the things that we're arguing should be first class fields, like there's something that we have to get right, period, before we introduce the protocol. Because once you define a protocol, you can't really change it unless there's a versioning mechanism, because people will start consuming that and writing pods that expect to, you know, get this information.
There is a versioning mechanism, and we want to upgrade the version. So there's a important security fix that comes in. If we don't have, you know, if some field needs to be added, that's definitely required, and it needs to go through the Kubernetes lifecycle. We're effectively, you know, holding them back from pushing the security fix.
thinking.
Mhm.
I don't know. Saad, what do you think about just letting these be opaque even for things that like you definitely have to have?
With well-defined keys, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, just implementing well-defined keys in those parameters for certain protocols. I mean, I can see it working, but it just makes me feel, doesn't make me feel good.
Why would one
I
preclude
understand
the
the
other?
concern, Ben. That's the reason I'm even bringing it up. This is very important to kind of sort out, I think.
Did
Yeah.
we
Why
lose
can't?
Saad?
Saad's not here.
He dropped off.
Okay, he had to jump probably because we're past time.
Yeah, let's bring it up with him around say on Monday. So Xing, will we be meeting next week on Monday as well as Thursday?
Next week, so the meeting is still on. Thursday, I don't know if the community is going to cancel some meetings next week. I haven't seen anything because next week is actually KubeCon, right? So virtual KubeCon, don't know, but I haven't seen any cancellation. So right now, those meetings are still on.
That's good, I think. That's good, actually. I would rather have more time to discuss this than to next week.
I would expect most of the meetings, at least Tuesday and later, to get canceled.
Probably, I think that makes sense because this time it's North American time, so
But
the meetings.
But Shin, what is the mechanism? Because like, I want to cancel my data populators meeting next week. Like, how would I just send an email?
Since it's not the organizer, you will have to cancel because I don't know how to cancel your meeting, right?
Yeah, I don't.
Sure
well, I forwarded you the invite, or I sent you the invite, and you forwarded to the
but
list. Like,
the
I don't know
thing
how
is,
to.
if I look at my calendar, I don't even see the group. I only see like the few people, like 4 people. I forward it to other people. It doesn't stay on my calendar. It's weird.
Okay, well, I don't understand. Yeah, the process of canceling meetings is a technical
Maybe you can
challenge.
send an email, right? Maybe you can send an email Monday saying meeting canceled, and people will get that. I think if you send out to you probably have everybody. If you send the email, but I wouldn't get that. So yeah,
Okay.
I'll ask Sad. I don't know if what he want to do because we do have some other meetings, the SIG storage meeting also next week. So I'll ask him if that should be canceled. Probably should. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So anyways, we're meeting on Monday. Let's continue on Monday.
So yeah, sorry. I think I forgot to record in the earlier part. So I think I only recorded half of the meeting.
Oh, okay. It's okay. I think yeah, the good part of the discussion you got then.
Yeah, the conclusion at least, or close to conclusion is the second half. Okay.
So Ben, let's continue this on Monday. There are a few other concerns, but we're definitely heading in the right direction.
Sounds good.
Yeah. If anyone else has any questions, now's a good time to ask. If not, we can wind up for today. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.